Hello. Do you have the recording on already on purpose?
I do. Let me pause it. It just automatically go ahead and, excuse me for that, get started with a couple of introductions. So I wanted to introduce myself first. My name is Takami Clark. I'm from Big Sky Public Relations, and we are a PR firm that has offices throughout Montana, including staff in Missoula. And we specialize in helping public agencies with communications and public involvement, and have been hired by the city of Missoula to assist in spreading the word and organizing meetings about the Johnson Street Community Center. And that's what we're here to discuss tonight. We'll be running through some short introductions and information here pretty soon. And then we'll transition into a Q&A/comment period. And for that, we will prioritize questions written in the chat first. So please be sure to familiarize yourself with that function. It looks like the little text bubble at the bottom of your screen. And then if you don't have that function or you prefer not to use it, we can also transition out of that and go into speaking. And then for that, you would just unmute yourself and wait to be called on before speaking. And I'll review these directions again once we transition to that question and comment period. And I also wanted to give a small plug that if you prefer to chat in person with us, we are hosting an open house for the Johnson Street Community Center from 4 to 7 p.m. on October 28th. Hopefully you've seen some information about that. And you're welcome to attend and encourage others to attend as well. We'd love to connect with you guys there. And with that, let me just see if, sorry about this. I know that Jenny from the city of Missoula is having some technical problems. So it looks like, I don't think she can speak at this moment, but I can basically cover what she was going to say. So just thank you all for attending. We are here to talk about the Johnson Street Community Center continuing this year, and have done a number of communication efforts to get the word out about this. We've sent out a mailer, have met with community members. We're hosting this meeting and hosting an open house as well, as you heard about. And so we will have a lot of avenues for people to communicate with us, and it doesn't just stop there. We highly encourage you all, if you have questions or concerns that are ongoing, please feel free to reach out. And I'm just sort of seeing some stuff pop up in the chat. Yeah, I do think, so I see Jenny's on the list, but then I don't know that she has capability to speak using her microphone. So if she does pop back on, I will turn things over to her and have her talk for us. Oh, there you are, Jenny. Sorry. Okay, Jenny, I will stop stealing your thunder then, and feel free to take things over from here.
Thank you. Sorry, terrible technology, utter failure here. Where are we? To introduce or?
I did my introduction, and now it's your turn, and then you'll introduce Glenn.
All right. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to welcome everybody to the meeting, to let you know that doing emergency winter shelter at Johnson Street this winter was not something that we came to very easily. We all know that COVID in our community has presented us with very challenging problems. We had believed last year would be the only time that we would need to use Johnson Street for emergency winter shelter. And here we are again a year later, with the Poverello Center still being at half capacity, simply because of the pandemic, which means they are only sleeping about 88 people per night. And we know, having slept about 135 people on many nights last winter at Johnson Street that we need more winter shelter than we could provide there. We have engaged Big Sky Public Relations. Takami is here from Big Sky to help us talk to people and be able to gather their comments and incorporate them into the plans that we make for the winter. We did a mailing to 4,900 and some businesses and residences in this neighborhood because we wanted you all to hear from us first that we had to make this decision. And we're holding this public meeting and also an open house on October 28th so that we can hear from people what their concerns are, whether they support, how they can support us, which we've heard a lot of that from people too, and attempting to incorporate those things into the way we operate this winter. So I am going ahead and turning it over to Gwen Jones to tell us a little bit about the City Council's intent in offering winter shelter and its concerns as well.
Great, thank you, Ginny. Can you all hear me?
We can, Gwen.
Sorry, Gwen, I think
You're muted now.
I accidentally muted you when I was trying to unmute myself and let you know that I can hear you, so I can hear you.
Okay, I'm back. Woo! All right. Thanks everyone for coming tonight, and thank you for to the neighborhood for everyone who was able to come, and I'm hoping I know you can spread the word to those who weren't able to come tonight. In general, I would say City Council has had a long-standing policy of wanting to do what, just a second, I'm going to shut the door. My husband's now on a conference call. Okay, I'm back. City Council has had a long-standing policy of wanting to, as best we can, create winter shelter with the bottom line goal of saving lives. We live in a developed country, we have resources, and yet we have people who die on the streets every winter. So there is has always been a long history and a strong concerted effort from council to do what we can to address this within our community. Know that we do have limited resources, however, and the Poverello has been an incredible force in our community for really handling this issue as best as possible. But over the last few years, even prior to the pandemic, we were seeing overflow issues and having to do some accommodations. And I think several years ago, we literally had, it was one of those polar vortex freezes where we had people in the transit shelter downtown with the bus stop as kind of a makeshift scenario to get people in out of the cold. We've worked with the Salvation Army over the last few years as they've created their new facility over on Russell. Always there are capacity issues, there's funding issues, capacity issues. And so it's never a perfect solution, but there have been strong forays to try and make it work. And then the pandemic hit, and what was already a difficult problem became exponentially more complicated when our main facility had to basically cut in half the amount of people that they could host. So last year, along with the temporary outdoor shelter spearheaded by the county, Johnson Street Shelter also was tipped up. And just as Jenny said, I really didn't think we'd be having the same conversation this year to the degree we're having. And everybody's trying to wrap their head around the fact that we're still in a pandemic, but here we are. So we put a lot of time into trying to figure out what would work this year and if there were other options. And ultimately, without going into a ton of details, we didn't really have any other options that were viable, so came back to the Johnson Street shelter. So first of all, to the neighborhood, I do want to say I appreciate what a huge impact this is on your neighborhood. And I know there are those who are very supportive of this Johnson Street shelter and others who are more focused on the negative impact on their neighborhood. And first of all, as Ginny said, this was not a decision made lightly, and I want to acknowledge that there is a big impact on the neighborhood, and sometimes there's very difficult situations. So I think the focus is going forward, first of all, housing people so that they are not dying out on the streets. Second of all, how can we make this work as best as possible for the neighborhood? And I think we can talk in more detail about the security plan that is forming for this coming year. But as I've said several times in public meetings, more information from the neighborhood as to how best form that security plan and come up with good tools that can better help make it work in the neighborhood so that people are not having stuff happen on their front lawn that they really don't want to see happen. But instead, how can we make it work? So first of all, thank you to the neighborhood for all of your efforts and your patience and all of that last year. Yes, we're here again this year. I thank you again in advance for this year, and let's figure it out and partner and figure out how best we can handle this. And the final thing I will say is City Council has also worked very hard over the last years, not only just trying to do stopgap measures for each winter, but what's the long term, what's the long game here. And this is a hard problem. My husband and I, his main law practice that I help him with deals with a lot of homeless people, getting them disability benefits. These are hard situations to work with. If they were easy, we wouldn't be having all of these conversations, but they're oftentimes very difficult. So in the meantime, we've got some long game solutions. We're looking at the Trinity facility that is being built. I don't expect this problem to ever be 100% solved. I don't expect to get everybody housed perfectly, but we're going to do the best we can as a community to make progress and to do the best we can on it. So, and tonight we're talking about Johnson and getting as much information in as we can to make it work as best as possible for everybody. So thanks. I rambled on a lot there. Someone else's turn now.
We're popping over to Emily now.
Awesome, thanks. Thanks for all of that, Gwen. I'm Emily Armstrong, she, her. I'm the Reaching Home Manager with the city. And I just want to share a little bit of context on the importance of the Emergency Winter Shelter Project, kind of how it works, how it's funded, and then the security element that's been such a big piece of these conversations, and just share a little bit more about where we are with that process. So the Emergency Winter Shelter Project is critical. We've heard from folks already that this is intended truly just to keep folks alive. That's really our end goal here. We want to keep folks alive during a really challenging Montana winter that we all have to experience. So we've seen success in that through our emergency winter shelter efforts. And so it's really important that we continue with those efforts in whatever capacity is needed in the midst of a pandemic or whatever is thrown at us to keep our neighbors alive. So that's just really the heart of this project. It is a city project, and then we contract out with the Poverello Center to operate the shelter and to operate the service component. And they are an amazing partner. They are grounded in low barrier methods and really supporting residents on site, trying to wrap around everyone that shows up at the shelter with other services, with connections to our coordinated entry system, and everything they can to support these folks in any way possible. At the same time, we all also work really closely, as Ginny highlighted, and as hopefully you'll continue to see, to keep close relationships with the neighbors and with neighboring businesses and just anyone in the area to figure out how to be a good neighbor and how to make this a successful project, not just for the folks staying at the shelter, but for everyone in the vicinity. We know it's not an insignificant impact, and so we just really try to figure out what the challenges are that you're facing and how to mitigate those as best as possible with the resources that we have. The funding for emergency winter shelter comes from different sources every year. This year, and city and county funding has been a constant. So this year, the city is contributing $311,000 from American Rescue Plan Act funds. And then the county is contributing $100,000, $50,000 of which is coming also from American Rescue Act funds, but from the county's portion. And then 50,000 will come from a financial assistance fund that the county operates. And then the Human Resource Council has given us $205,000 from their emergency solutions grant to support the project as well. So the total budget is about $615,000, not an insignificant cost. And yeah, we're just grateful to be able to find the funding to make it possible, again, just to keep folks safe and warm during the winter months. The security component has been an addition that we built out this year in response to these kinds of conversations, to the things we're hearing from neighbors and businesses, to figure out how we can make the project more successful. You know, we're learning as we go. Last year was our first time at Johnson Street. We only know what we're learning, and so we're trying to adapt and process. And so this is one of those adaptations. As Gwen mentioned, it's still in process. The contract isn't signed yet, and part of that is we're hoping to be able to integrate feedback that we're hearing from neighbors and surrounding businesses around what the need is for a security presence. And the hope of this security really is to support both the residents in the facility and also support neighbors in the surrounding area, to decrease calls to law enforcement and to just make the experience better for all involved. And I do want to contextualize the security at the emergency winter shelter in this larger security scope that we're building out, which is not just emergency winter shelter. It is a 4-site security scope that we are building out in recognition of the need for security across all of our sites, really just an added resource, an added support, an added relationship, and an added touch point for, again, residents and neighborhoods in all of these sites. So the sites include both the emergency winter shelter and the Poverello main shelter, as well as the new authorized camping area that the city and county are developing off of Clark Ford Lane, and the temporary safe outdoor space. And so all 4 are really critical components of our houselessness response. And we're hoping that security presence at all 4, again, just adds a resource, adds a relationship, adds a touch point to make these spaces feel safer, make these spaces operate more in a stronger way, and decrease calls to law enforcement, and just provide extra capacity for staff who are operating these facilities. The emergency winter shelter scope as of now will be a 24/7 presence. We are intending to start off with 24/7 security staff in the perimeter of the building, as well as in the surrounding public and neighborhood areas, with the expectation that we'll kind of, again, learn as we go. If a 24/7 need presents itself throughout the entirety of the operation of the emergency winter shelter, we'll maintain that level of service. If it becomes evident that, you know, the need is less than that, then we'll adapt as we go and figure out the times that are most critical and figure that out in process. But we are going to begin with a 24/7 presence. And again, that presence is intended to serve the residents of the facility, maintaining the safety of this facility perimeter, and then also serve the surrounding neighborhoods. So some of the feedback we've been hearing that we intend to integrate into the scope of that contract is presence in some of the local parks, MRL Park, McLeod Park, presence on the Milwaukee Trail, presence specifically during pre and post school hours. Some of those elements that, you know, in those feedback points that we've heard about times and areas of highest impact, really trying to build that into the security team's scope. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to say on that. I think those are the main elements. I'm going to be tracking feedback that we hear today so that, again, we can incorporate that as we work to finalize the contract and build out that scope in a way that really serves the need. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you all. And I'm hoping that in the conversations that we've already had, we've collected a lot of the information that you all will have to share as well. So thank you for being here. Thanks for engaging on this project. I know it's a hard one on a lot of different angles. It's not easy by any means. And I'm just grateful for everyone who gives their time to working through it together.
Thanks, Emily. And there was a chat that came in while you were talking, asking if you could name those 4 sites again.
Absolutely. They are the emergency winter shelter that we're discussing tonight at 1919 North Avenue West, the Poverello's main shelter on Broadway, the authorized camping area, which is not yet open, but we're hoping to open it towards the end of this year, which will be off of Clark Fork Lane behind the Walmart on Mullen. And then the fourth site is the temporary safe outdoor space, which currently is out by Buckhouse Bridge and already has a security presence. They've had that since opening in December of 2020. And that site may expand over the next 12 months and may move locations. That's all also being discussed between city and county. And so if that does happen, an expansion and or a new site for the temporary safe outdoor space, there will be security presence there as well.
Thank you. And I did want to quickly address Craig's earlier question, which was asking about whether this is a meeting just for Franklin residents. And we did invite, in addition to that neighborhood, Southgate Triangle, Rose Park, and Two Rivers. And now I will turn things over to the Poverello Center, and we have 3 different folks from that organization here. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you. I'm Jill Bonney, the Executive Director of the Poverello Center. Thanks, Emily. You mentioned so many great things. I think the only thing that maybe if we could go back and it can be, sorry to like add this in, but maybe talk a little bit about the training, the additional training that some of the security guards will have either now or once I get done. I just think that's really a really important part.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to touch on it now real quick. I'm trying to pull up the document. Yes, so it's really important to us that that the security staff are well trained in working with this particular population. This is a really specific population. This is a population that has historically been over monitored and over controlled and stigmatized and disempowered in significant ways. So we are working with security staff to offer and various city entities and the crisis intervention team and other nonprofit partners to offer a pretty comprehensive training. The initial onboarding training will be a full two-day training that'll cover a de-escalation training, mental health first aid, an overview of the crisis intervention team, safety considerations and more de-escalation techniques, Native community cultural considerations, LGBTQIA+ information and resources, the National Alliance of Mental Illness information resources, and a variety of other related elements. So just really trying to provide a comprehensive, holistic training for security staff before or very early on into their working at these 4 sites to make sure that the presence is trauma informed and all of these things, as this is a very particular population to be asking to interact with security. Thanks for asking that, Jill.
Yeah, I think it's an important part. So thank you very much. I just wanted to start off and say that as far as we know, there were no individuals who died due to exposure while living unsheltered last year. And I just think that was even during the extreme cold snap that we had in February. And I think that's a big reason why the winter shelter is so important. Our primary goal really is to provide shelter to as many people as we possibly can, as safely as we can. So at the Johnson Street shelter, last year we provided shelter to up to 150 individuals. I think our highest number was 135, but we can provide shelter to up to 150. Many of the individuals that sought shelter at the Johnson Street shelter had not sought shelter indoors for years, but because of their relationship that they'd made with our homeless outreach team members, they did come into shelter. And came indoors, and it was really good to see people who were warm and safe, especially on those really cold nights. We provide 1 warm meal a day to individuals and a warm place to rest. We connect individuals to services around mental and physical health, substance use, employment, housing, etc. And just let people come and go as they need and get warm and something in their stomach when they need it. As was stated earlier, our main shelter here on West Broadway usually sleeps 175 individuals during the winter months, but because of CDC COVID restrictions, for the past about 18 months, we have only been able to serve 88 individuals in our building, and that cuts our capacity at half. Last night, we turned away 20 individuals who were seeking shelter, and we were unable to let them come in the building. It's cold, and it gets really cold in Montana at night. So we know that we're a difficult neighbor. We understand that, but also just really want to do the best we can to address the issues that we have control over. And the opportunity to run the winter shelter again means hope that nobody will freeze to death this winter. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jill. At this point, I'd like to now transition over to our questions. I see we're already getting some in. So again, if you were kind of late to the meeting, please submit your questions via the chat. And then if you prefer not to do that, we'll prioritize answering our chat questions first, but then we'll switch over to doing spoken questions. And for that, we'll ask you guys to just unmute yourself and then wait to be called on. So I'll get things started off. And our first question, this one's from John, who said, were the clients required to depart in the daytime hours, as he believes is the format of the West Broadway POV? He doesn't quite recall last year's Johnson daily shelter format. And I think I'll probably turn things over to the POV for that.
Yeah. No, the Johnson Street shelter operates more as a drop-in, so people can come and go as needed. So we don't ask them to be gone. They can be there all day long, all night long. If people are outside and need to come indoors to get warm, they can come in. There isn't a certain check-in time. It's very low barrier around letting people in. So no, we don't ask people to leave during the day.
Jill, can I add one thing to this?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Yeah, so the one thing that I would, and I'm Jesse, also working at the Poverello Center. One thing that's going to be different this year is last year we were contracted through the end of March, but then secured extra funding to stay open evenings only through April to kind of get through the rest of the cold weather. One of the things I think we noticed, and one of the changes we're making this year is that the act of closing during the day but being open during the night created a situation where people would kind of scatter into the neighborhood during the day and present problems across the neighborhood. So one of the changes we will be doing is if we're operating through April, we will be operating like 24/7 during that time to kind of address that particular impact to the neighborhood.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jesse.
All right, and our next questions come from Sandra. Sandra, if you want to unmute and give us a shout.
Thank you. So I'm Sandra Basica. I'm city councilor for Ward 6. This is my ward. I share it with Julie Merritt. Julie Merritt and I shared a lot of concerns with this. We did vote separately on this, but she did understand a lot of the concerns that came from the local constituents. One of my main concerns is the safety, and we are going to have the private security, which I really appreciate this year. One of my questions is, you mentioned that there was that new camping area off of Clark Fork Lane. And I mentioned that because you guys mentioned it, and actually a couple, like I think 2 months ago or a month and a half ago, Julie and I met with a couple of business owners on Clark Fork Lane because they were very concerned about that. And we haven't really had any answers about that. So can you guys shine some light on that, or is that something that I have to wait for a further date for?
I can take that one. We are still in process of figuring out the final operation of the authorized camp area off of Clark Fork Lane. Our most recent step in that process was submitting an application to Department of Public Health and Human Services at the state level. And then they recently sent us their revisions. And so we're now working through that part of the process. So there's still definitely some boxes to be checked and some process to get us to the point of opening that site. And I think a lot more communication and information to be shared. We're just not quite at that stage yet, but we do hope to have it open by the end of the year, again, to help kind of ease some of the tension on our system right now with just the higher numbers of folks who are unhoused that we're seeing, and the decreased shelter capacity across the board and the wait lists across the board. Our Meadowlark Family Housing Shelter has been full and on wait list for quite a long time. The current temporary safe outdoor space has been full and on wait list for quite a long time. So we are hoping to get it up and open as soon as possible to help ease that tension, but more information to come soon.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I just, with this Johnson Street shelter, I felt like I was left out of a lot of the planning for it, and it wasn't my ward. And I know it's not any of your guys' fault. I just, I would like to be included a lot in this next program that's going on, just so I can be involved. I would really appreciate that. And yeah, I already expressed all my views about this shelter. Yes, I did vote no on it at the beginning, but I mean, people do need to be housed, and I really hope that it goes a lot better this year. So thank you for making your amendments and a lot of progress on this. I really do appreciate you guys helping out the citizens and helping out the neighbors and helping out the homeless on this. So you guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Our next question comes from Jen. Jen is asking, how are these folks getting to the shelter and other services?
That might be a question for us. We don't provide transportation. So public transportation, we're fortunate enough in Missoula to have public transportation that there's no charge for. So, but we don't, if the question is if we're providing transportation, we don't provide.
And I'll add, I think if I remember correctly, the Johnson Street Community Center is on 2 different bus lines, I think with stops pretty close by.
Yeah, I think you're correct. I can't remember them offhand.
I think it's 2 and 8. I was just looking at this recently. I could be wrong, but I think it's 2 and 8.
Awesome. Next question is from Craig, and it is this a private security firm or is it a program managed by the city?
It is a private security firm.
Okay.
Can I just make a few comments since we're on my name?
Go ahead.
Of course, we all know that the police are at these shelters every night, and they aren't necessarily there for the best and brightest and the most vulnerable that are staying there. And they're often repeat offenders. And that's, I'm really glad to hear there's a private security firm coming in because it's much needed. I mean, and 24/7 is the way to go because you never know when things are going to happen. Of course, we have police as backup, but it's my feeling that this must affect the morale of the police department because every shift they know that they're going to get called to one of the shelters. Paramedics get called there all the time for issues, a lot of mental health issues. So I know staff is trained and the security force will be trained, but security needs to be tough. That's what security is. And I think all the training is great, but I think our most vulnerable will feel better with a tough security plan. Because like I said, the cops know the repeat offenders and it takes too much of their time. Missoula has changed a lot in COVID. We have a lot of people coming in causing more problems, and our police need to be ready for those kind of things. And I'm really happy to hear about the security plan. It sounds a little fluffy if you ask me, but it's needed. in our neighborhood, and especially in the middle of the night. So thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate your thoughts on that. Our next question is from Reed, and it is the funding for the security scope between the 4 sites all tied to the same contract? I'll go to Emily for that.
Yes, it is. We requested funding for security for all of these sites during our city budget process this year. And so it's all coming from the same line, which would be through American Rescue Plan Act funds.
Thank you. Our next
Hi,
question.
can I also share since it's on my name?
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Reed.
Hi, I'm Reed. I'm a resident of the Southgate Triangle neighborhood, and I just want to be clear that police interactions make us less safe, and it's the resources that we need, and that I am very against funding going towards security when it could be used towards resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from John, and he is wondering clarification about the daily operation formats. The West Broadway POV does close to winter clients during the daytime. That's a question. If so, why the distinction / difference? I'll go to Jill for that first.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with the way the buildings are set up. So the Johnson Street shelter is one big, almost like a warehouse type room where there's quite a bit of room for people to move around in that area, where our Broadway shelter doesn't have as large of spaces. And so the reason why we close it a couple times a day for a few hours is, number one, so that we can do some cleaning. Number two, because we can't have 88 individuals in the building, or more than 88 individuals in the building, and be able to social distance. So the building does have to close a couple times during the day at the Broadway shelter. And that's really the big difference is the makeup and size of the building.
So that's my question. Can I tag on to that?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I heard earlier the concern at Johnson Street for not closing was essentially dispersal into the neighborhood, which we all know happens up on the west side every day. And so I think this just kind of should bring some focus to like some kind of long-term plan for daily operations to reduce those kind of impacts on neighborhoods, wherever this may be. And I'm going to, for the sake of the PR uptake, I'm going to drop a number of comments. It sounds like you wanted sort of an outline of the things that the neighborhood is looking for. I'm going to drop a good strand of those into the chat box, so you'll have those, Ms. Clark.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. All right. Our next question is from Lisa, and this is, she states, we were told to call the homeless outreach team if we see issues this year. Do you share those issues reported to you with the police department? Great question.
I mean, it depends upon the issue. Our hope with the homeless outreach team is that we can try to mitigate not needing to involve the police department if at all possible. So, you know, a lot of times it can be someone who is escalated or is in an area where someone, you know, by a business where someone would prefer that they not be. And a lot of times the homeless outreach team can handle that situation and talk to the individual without having to involve law enforcement. If it's something where a crime is involved or where we need to involve police, we absolutely do share that.
Thank you. Our next question.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but don't we have a public outreach officer that is specifically with the Johnson Street shelter, Officer Kamira, I think, or Kamura? Is that right? Or am I wrong?
I don't know who wants
Not sure
to.
who.
I believe it's Officer Kamara, but I'm not with the city, so I don't know if somebody from the city wants to answer that.
Officer is with the police department, is one of the life officers, and he has been very involved last year with the Johnson Street shelter. And Jesse or Ginny, maybe you can add more. So yeah, I think the point I'd like to make is there's different levels of intervention to try and meet the problem where it's at. There's the hot team, there's the private security, there's Officer Kimura, and then there's bringing in other officers to handle something that is going to have to, that has escalated. So and Jesse, you were on the premises last year. How can you speak that more? Or
I mean, I think that the role of the hot team is, to be building relationships with people experiencing homelessness, to help guide them to resources and services. Of course, to encourage folks to get them into shelter when we can, because we can get them dialed into services better there. And to provide that kind of interface with local businesses and community, because the hot team generally knows everybody experiencing homelessness in our community, has a relationship, and can encourage them to move along. Yet I think that we would still encourage neighbors, if there's a situation that's not feeling safe, to definitely call 911. We do have a new resource that was, I think, underdeveloped in our community last year during Winter Shelter, that's much more developed now, which is the mobile crisis response unit that is also deployed through calling 911. We rely and work with them closely at the Poverello Center, and feel that if there's something that feels like a mental health crisis or things like that, they can get deployed and also deal with that situation. But that involves calling 911 in those situations. So, I would say that, Gwen, your point that there's layers of response is a correct one. And we're trying to work well to make sure that that we're deploying the best resource that treats our neighbors experiencing homelessness as humanely as possible.
Yes, and I could add, Gwen, in answer to Sandy's question about Ryan Kimura. He is our crime prevention officer in the police department. And so he works in a broader sense in neighborhoods all over the city, not necessarily just connected with emergency winter shelter, on larger questions of how we can prevent crime. So for instance, last year, he was very helpful to us at looking over the Johnson Street property and figuring out a safe place where people could be outside, but not interacting with the closest neighbors to the Johnson Street Community Center. He was instrumental in suggesting where a fence should be, that kind of thing, but he's not an on-call officer for any problem that might develop at Johnson Street.
Got it. Well, and sorry, it's a good transition here. I just wanted to add, not only I think are we taking in information but if people, after chewing on it, have other thoughts on how to help focus the security to be constructive and helpful for all, I think they should, first of all, Ginny or Emily, maybe we could give them contact information, or they can to their city councilor and we'll forward it on. But also in John Wolverton's comments, a comment about the neighborhood having good contact info for, I'm not sure that everything rises to the level of police, but who should they be calling, and kind of bringing the neighborhood so that they've got the resource, who to call for what type of issue. And I'm not sure if that was done last year or not. Just brainstorming to throw it out there. I think that would be helpful. I have no idea where we left off, but this was really good.
Thank you. Sandra, I noticed too that you wrote a similar question in the chat. Did you need us to repeat the mobile crisis number for everyone?
No, if you already said that, sorry, I have a 6-month-old and he distracts me a little bit. But I just wanted to have a closing statement if I'm allowed to have that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. So this is in my ward. This is mine and Julie Merritt's ward. And if anybody in the neighborhood is concerned or has any concerns and they don't know who to call, it's not extreme enough to call 911, but you have concerns, then email us, call us. My email is vasika@ci.missoula.mt.us. Julie's information is on the city website as well. We are your wards, your ward representatives, and that's what we're here for. I understand that it's a really it's a difficult thing that's happening right now. On one hand, there's a lot of we have to save people's lives, and on the other hand, we have to preserve the lives of other people. So it's really difficult to draw that line right there. But right now, I think that everyone in the city is, I've said my piece in the past, and so far, I think that everyone is doing the best that they can. And I really appreciate everything that everyone is doing right now. I will really encourage everyone, if they have any questions or concerns, to reach out to the Poverello Center or to the Emergency Winter Shelter. And I really do hope that it goes a lot better than last year. I hope that we can learn from last year and put those actions together this year. And thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you, Sandra. I apologize. I do want to circle back to questions again. Jen had a question. What kind of authority does a private security firm have, and can they detain or just call for city police?
So thanks. We are building into the contract that security are not permitted to detain unless someone is committing an act of violence. The intention is really not to provide that kind of law enforcement level of engagement, but really to provide kind of an increased presence to make it a little bit less enticing for folks to hang around, to engage in negative behaviors, to populate areas that they shouldn't be populating. So we're asking that security provide a presence that is more of a relational engagement type of presence and less of a hard line of detaining or acting harshly in those kinds of ways. There, of course, are security and there are a variety of engagement strategies on that spectrum. And so it depends on the situation, but the hope is that security will ask folks to move along should they be camping in a public right of way or an area where camping isn't permitted, that they'll ask folks to move along if they're engaging in behaviors outside of a facility that are detrimental to the facility or the residents in it and or to the neighborhood, and that they'll be able to keep an eye on all of those areas to know where those interactions are happening and to deter folks from going to that area, going to those spaces, going to those public parks and the trail systems, and keep those behaviors at a minimum. That's really the hope with the security presence.
Thank you. We also have a question from Craig. Are there any vocational services for visitors? Go ahead, Jill.
We don't provide any services, vocational type services. I guess at the Johnson Street Shelter, we do allow other service providers that would like to come in and offer services there. Yeah, I don't know. Jesse, do you have anything to add on that?
I mean, I think that one of the things we do is we do have what we call a resident volunteer program, which are residents that volunteer and receive some supports around job search and things like that. What a lot of people don't know is that our soup kitchen, which is part of this winter shelter and the main shelter, is run by only 2 full-time staff. The rest of the work that is done there is done by our by community volunteers and then resident volunteers. The other thing that I think that it's important to be aware of is that everybody that stays with us has a chore. We ask everybody to sign up for a chore, from sweeping to wiping things down, things like that, when they're staying with us. And that's part of the process of staying at the shelter. And yeah, and then just exactly what Jill said in terms of there are a lot of community partners that out there doing a lot of different types of things, including vocational training and things like that. We try to connect people to those services, but our core mission is providing food and shelter and keeping people alive. And we have our hands full every day doing that. So we really rely on our partners in the community to provide those other services.
Yep. Thanks, Jesse. I was like purely thinking winter shelter at Johnson Street more than the main shelter. So that's helpful. Thanks.
Thanks. I guess I'm just wondering if the average visitor is someone that is just stuck in this, or if there is a good percentage of the people that are working their way out. I have no idea.
Yeah, you know, we see a lot of individuals that have just run into some really tough spots in their life. And I know that right now, if I suddenly didn't have a job and didn't have any housing, it would take me a while to be able to save up first month's rent, last month's rent, you know, and a deposit. And that's a big chunk of money. And then to put on top of it, the fact that there's just no place to rent in Missoula anymore. And so really to sit down and have conversations with the individuals here and hear their stories. There are just so many people that have just had some bad luck or some circumstances that have compounded on top of one another that have put them in a situation that's really difficult to get out of.
Yeah, I've got one of those stories. I was at the Poverello Center a few weeks ago. First Interstate Bank had come and helped us repaint the dining hall at the main facility, which we were really excited about because it needed a new coat of paint badly. But one of our residents came up and started chatting me up there, and we get these stories all the time. But this guy was, you know, there was some drywall that was kind of messed up, and he was asking, "Hey, can I help out with like patching some of this drywall?" And this guy's a professional working right now full time. Doing drywall work for contractors, getting paid like $18 an hour full time, and he's living with us because he doesn't have a place to live. I mean, we have a lot of people that stay with us at the Poverello Center that have jobs, and because the housing market is so bad, they've got no place else to be but the Poverello Center. You know, last year we had a long-time resident who had been with the POV for a couple of years that we finally were able to get housed, who the only reason, and she was an older person, the only reason that she'd been staying with us is that she had a felony conviction from 30 years ago and couldn't find housing because of that old felony conviction. So, you know, those are the stories, those are the people that we're seeing there. Yes, we do have folks that are experiencing that category of chronic homelessness that have a lot of barriers and mental health and substance abuse issues. We need to address that issue as a community, and I think we're working hard to do that. But the vast majority of the people that we work with have an episode of homelessness, a crisis that happens. They come to the POV for 3 days to a month. They get back on their feet and they get back into housing and they get things sorted out. That's the norm. That would be the most common situation. And we need to make sure that those people aren't freezing to death out on the streets. That's why I come to work every day. I worked a 12-hour day today to make sure that people don't die on the streets. And I know that's what Jill does. That's what Sarah does. That's what everybody on our team is doing every day.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And I'd like to tag on to the mental health issues. What percentage of residents would you say have mental health issues? And, you know, I know staff receives training and the security team will receive training, but, you know, what kind of mental health professionals are on staff? Is there anyone there 24/7? Because I've also heard the police and paramedics deal with that.
First of all, I would just want to say we don't ask people for their medical information, but if I were to guess, there's a significant number of people that stay with us that do struggle with mental health. We do have I like to say we're infested with social workers. So we have a lot of us on staff that are trained in mental health, but don't provide any on-site therapy. We do have Winds of Change that is just across the way from us that do offer those services, and we connect them, our guests with Winds of Change when needed and when they would like that all the time. They're a great partner.
That sounds good.
Thank you. And I do want to be mindful of time. We're getting close to our hour mark. I'm going to transition over to John since I saw you had your hand up, but if there is anyone else that you haven't been entering in the chat and you've been dying to speak, please unmute yourself and I will call on you next. John, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I want to let you know that long list of recommendations I dropped. I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information for you so you could follow up with me. I'd be happy to unpack that or talk a little about the history, how I came to some of those conclusions. And that has to do with my engagement with some of the Neighbors in Action and having been a previous Franklin to Fort Neighborhood Council leadership team member. But what I was going to say in sort of a concluding statement, and this probably has a lot more to do or is more directed at our policymakers, and you've heard me and you'll probably hear me again in other forums. If we're really interested in equity, I think everybody has to share in this burden. This really became writ large to me when I was engaging to a modest extent in the current West Broadway plan. And I pulled out a map and I started counting the number of subsidized housing, crisis housing, social service offices, everything from basically like the Equinox down to the Needle Exchange, and look at where all of these things are happening in our city. And it basically is from the jail to the Poverello and West Broadway, and now it's working its way down to the YWCA near Russell, and now further down, the Needle Exchange has moved to Renan, and now we have a winter shelter down at Johnson and North. My point is that there's a huge contingent of people in the city and across the city who are willing to pay for this type of stuff, but there's not any other neighborhoods other than the West Side or running up and down about a 2 or 3 block stretch of Russell that are actually taking the burden on in real life. And so what I've said before, I want to say yes in my backyard. I want to be a good neighbor and I want to be helpful to people, but I want to say yes when I hear other neighborhoods saying yes as well. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, John. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you more. Let's see, is there anyone else who wanted to talk before I go over to Sandra's question? Not seeing too many unmuted folks.
DeHansa looked like he was about to unmute. Or she.
Hi, this is
Yeah.
DeHansa. Hi,
ahead.
I'm a member, I guess a relatively newer member of the community, but I was very interested to know, with respect to the last gentleman, why it mattered for other neighborhoods to get involved.
That's a question for me. Equity isn't
Yes,
just
sir.
about, yeah, equity
sir.
equity isn't just about sharing the financial burden. It's about all the neighborhoods being willing to share the burden. And it's also unhealthy for any city to concentrate and stratify basically their incomes in different neighborhoods. It's just not healthy. More vibrant cities tend to have people of all different income strata and capacities spread all across their neighborhoods, not concentrated in one area.
For clarification.
All right. And we are at 8 o'clock. I apologize, Sandra, for not getting to your question, but I think between Emily and the POV, if you guys want to work together on an answer for that and get that over to Sandra, that'll be best. And
I'm sorry, but I actually think that that's a question that should be answered over the air. Because a lot of folks, like, my question was, are there any resources for folks who want to leave the situation? But they need to get their resources together before they actually leave. So a lot of folks, like, before they leave a domestic violence situation, or before they leave a situation where they need to leave their house, before they're actually in that place, where can they go to get those questions answered before they actually leave? If there's any answers for that.
Jill, do you want to take that or do?
Go ahead. Go
I mean,
ahead.
I think that like 211 is a great resource for folks that are that might be on the verge of homelessness to call there. And there's lots of different resources that people can get to. Of course, if we can prevent someone from becoming homeless, that's like the gold standard, right? Like
Exactly. So how do they contact you?
Yeah, so that 211 is not us. That's another agency that does that has it's a phone call people can make that then can connect them to resources. There are like housing resources in terms of vouchers and stuff like that that are managed by the Human Resource Council and other places like that. But 211 is a phone number you can call.
Is it just 211? You just call 211?
211, and it's staffed 24/7 with people that can provide resources to do that. And we do work on diversion. Like our staff, one of the things when they're doing an intake to do is to ask people, okay, you know, this should be your last resort. What are your other options? What can we do to like get you to a better option? Because once you become homeless, it's really hard to not be homeless anymore. And so like, these are things that we're trying to work on all the time as well around these things. So, but 211's the kind of the collector of that. Did I get that right, Jill, or is there other?
Yeah, no, that's correct. And 211 is the Human Resource Council. And Teresa Williams also put in the chat that it's also 549-5555. So either way, but 211 is really easy to remember.
I'll
Thank
also
you
add
both
that
so much. Oh, sorry.
I'll just add that that's true across our Missoula Coordinated Entry System. Any agency that is an access point, advertised or non-advertised, is trained through our office to do housing prevention conversations and diversion conversations in the hopes that we can divert anyone or provide or help have strengths-based conversations to figure out a rapid resolution early on, so that they're not actually entering the system, but they're able to divert before they enter the houselessness system altogether. So that is part of the coordinated entry system as a whole. And we do have some resources that are accessed through that 211 number to support folks with one-time payments and just resources like that to help folks stabilize if it's just a quick need that they need or a quick fix that they're able to resolve based on the supports that they already have in their life.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I thought that that information needed to be on the public record. Thanks.
thank you, Sandra. Right before we leave and hop off, Amy sent me a good question. She was curious about what opportunities for ongoing community discussion there are. And I know we have the open house and the POV has community meetings as well. So I wanted to have you guys give a plug for that as well.
Yeah, so Sarah, our colleague, put in the chat the place that people can sign up for our monthly neighborhood meetings. They'll be happening on the first Thursday of each month at noon. Also, my office number is in there. So if people want to touch base and have questions or get plugged into further conversation, I invite people to give me a call there. My office is actually in the Johnson Street facility now. And so I'm here on a daily basis and kind of know what's going on around here. And then I'll let someone else talk about the open house.
Thank you, Jesse. And that open house is on October 28th at the Johnson Street Center. if you want to attend that. And we will all be there to meet with folks 4 to 7 p.m. And with that, I'd like to just thank everyone for coming. There are a bunch of resources in the chat if you want to scroll through and write down people's numbers and email addresses. Again, if you have questions or comments lingering after this meeting, you can always attend the open house or these monthly meetings, or you can always email Emily or Jesse with your comments and concerns. And I will also be following up with John. All right. With that, I want to thank you guys for your time and for staying on after 8. And I hope you all have a great evening. Again, thank you so much for this great conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.